It was the second morning after Christmas when Dr. Watson visited 221B Baker Street. His intention was simply to extend his seasonal greetings, but as was often the case, Holmes appeared to be in the midst of deciphering yet another puzzle. The air was thick with the scent of tobacco, and the unmistakable tools of Holmes' trade, a magnifying lens and a pair of forceps, rested on the seat of the chair beneath the enigmatic hat.
You seem occupied as always, Holmes. Have I interrupted one of your cases?
Not at all, Watson. In fact, I'm rather pleased you're here. The matter is a minor one, but it holds elements worthy of consideration. See this hat? To the untrained eye, it's a relic of no significance. But to me, it's a narrative waiting to unfold.
Dr. Watson stepped closer, his gaze falling upon the hat. Its brim was frayed, the felt cracked and discolored, a pathetic sight, yet strangely compelling under Holmes' scrutiny.
Holmes, your ability to extract stories from the humblest objects never fails to amuse me. But surely, this hat belongs to some sordid affair, perhaps a crime waiting to be unraveled?
No, my dear Watson, no crime here. This is one of those curious little incidents that arise in a city as vast and teeming as ours. Amid the crush of humanity, peculiarities are bound to emerge, threads of coincidence and whimsy that weave themselves into our lives.
The warmth of the fire contrasted sharply with the frosty panes of the window, where delicate ice crystals formed intricate patterns. Watson stretched out his hands, letting the heat thaw his fingers, as Holmes continued.
Such events seem to occur with surprising frequency around you, Holmes. Of the last 6 cases I've noted, 3 were entirely innocent of crime, yet equally fascinating.
Precisely. You refer to the Irene Adler affair, the singular Miss Mary Sutherland, and the man with the twisted lip, all intriguing puzzles without criminality. This hat, Watson, appears to belong in that category as well.
Holmes' gaze shifted back to the chair. His fingers, long and delicate, steepled as he prepared to recount the tale.
You remember Peterson, the commissionaire?
Yes, of course.
This item came to me courtesy of Peterson. Early on Christmas morning, he found it along with a rather plump goose, an unlikely pair if ever there was one.
A goose and a hat, you say? Surely he returned them to their owner.
Ah, therein lies the problem. The goose bore a card that read for Mrs. Henry Baker, and this hat bears the initials HB stitched into the lining. But, Watson, how many Henry Bakers are there in this city? And how many of them would admit to losing such a shabby item?
Holmes reclined slightly, his expression serene yet sharp, as he prepared to delve further into the tale.
Peterson found them under unusual circumstances. Returning home in the early hours, he saw a man in the gaslight, a tall fellow, unsteady on his feet, with a white goose slung over his shoulder. As the man approached Goose Street, a group of roughs accosted him. A scuffle broke out, during which the man's hat was knocked off, and a shop window was smashed. The fellow, startled, fled, abandoning both the goose and his hat.
A most peculiar scene, Holmes. And what became of the goose?
I believe it now sits in Peterson's kitchen, roasting to perfection. Its fate is far less mysterious than the battered hat, which remains an intellectual puzzle waiting to be solved.
The hat hung forlornly on the chair's backrest, cracked and dusty, its worn brim curled with age. Once, it had been lined with fine red silk, now faded and stained. The initials HB, crudely scrawled on one side, spoke of an unknown owner. Holmes, however, saw more in the battered article than met the eye.
The goose has met its ultimate destiny, Watson, roasting merrily, I assume, in Peterson's kitchen. Yet the hat remains with me, the last vestige of the unknown gentleman who forfeited his Christmas dinner.
But surely the man advertised for his belongings.
No. Not a single word from him. And so, what clues do we have to his identity? Only what we can deduce.
From this hat? Surely you jest, Holmes.
Not at all, Watson. You know my methods. What can you deduce from the individuality of the man who wore this hat? Take it, examine it yourself.
Watson took the dilapidated hat in his hands, turning it over with some reluctance. Its edges were frayed, the ink-smudged patches poorly concealed its wear. The elastic of the hat securer was missing, rendering it less practical. Disheartened, Watson handed it back to Holmes.
I see nothing, Holmes. It's just an old, shabby hat.
On the contrary, Watson, you see everything. What you fail to do is reason from what you see. You hesitate to infer.
Then enlighten me, Holmes. What can you deduce from this hat?
Holmes picked up the hat, his keen eyes scanning it as if it held the secrets of the universe. He leaned back slightly, holding the hat in his hands as he began his analysis.
It offers less than I'd hoped, yet there are conclusions that are clear and others that carry a strong balance of probability. The man is highly intellectual, that much is obvious, and he was fairly prosperous within the last 3 years, though he has since fallen upon harder times. This decline, Watson, points to moral retrogression. Drink, perhaps, or some other vice, an influence that has tarnished his foresight. It is equally evident that his wife has ceased to love him.
My dear Holmes, this is absurd.
He retains some degree of self-respect, though. He is sedentary, ventures out little, is middle-aged, and entirely out of physical training. His grizzled hair was cut within the last few days, and he anoints it with lime cream. Furthermore, it's highly unlikely that he has gas laid on in his house.
Holmes, surely you are joking.
Not in the least. Even now, when I offer my conclusions, you fail to see how they are reached. Let me demonstrate. For instance, his intellect.
Holmes placed the hat upon his own head, the brim nearly swallowing his forehead. It sank low, almost to the bridge of his nose.
The size of the hat speaks to the cubic capacity of his brain. A man with so large a brain must certainly have something in it.
And his decline?
The hat is 3 years old. Such curled brims came into fashion then. This was a hat of the finest quality, observe the ribbed silk band and excellent lining. If he could afford such an expensive article 3 years ago but has had no replacement since, then surely his fortunes have dwindled.
The hat, shabby as it was, became Holmes' portal into deduction, a relic bearing traces of its owner's past. Its worn brim hinted at years of service, and the ink-stained patches whispered of attempts to salvage dignity from decay.
Well, Watson, the signs are clear, are they not? The foresight and the moral retrogression, they are as plain as day. Observe, here is the foresight.
Holmes gestured to the small disc and loop of the hat securer, his eyes bright with the joy of explanation.
These are never sold with hats. The man who owned this article went out of his way to add it, as a precaution against the wind. That action shows foresight, a mind attuned to detail. But the broken elastic. He has not bothered to replace it, demonstrating a distinct weakening in nature, a loss of care, of purpose.
Your reasoning is plausible, Holmes.
Holmes continued, his focus sharp. His hand traced the ink-smudged patches on the hat.
And yet, Watson, see how the stains upon the felt have been daubed with ink. This tells us he retains some degree of self-respect, though diminished by his circumstances. He has not entirely surrendered to his decline.
Watson listened intently as Holmes shifted his attention to the lower lining of the hat, peering through his lens with precision.
The man is middle-aged, his hair grizzled, recently cut, see here, Watson. These hair ends, cleanly severed by the barber's scissors, are still adhesive. And the faint scent of lime cream? Indisputable evidence of the man's habits.
Watson, though fascinated, raised a skeptical brow as Holmes continued his deductions.
But his wife, Holmes, you claim she has ceased to love him. How do you infer that from this?
Simple, Watson. This hat has not been brushed for weeks. When I see **Q**, Watson, with a week's worth of dust upon your hat, and your wife allows you to go out in such a state, then I shall know that you, too, have lost her affection.
But he might be a bachelor, Holmes.
Nonsense. He was bringing home the goose as a peace offering to his wife, remember? The card upon its leg is the clearest proof.
Holmes raised the hat once more, his gaze now fixed upon 5 distinct tallow stains.
And this, Watson, these stains, reveal that gas is not laid on in his house. A chance tallow stain could happen to anyone, but 5 such marks? Impossible to ignore. This man frequently walks with a guttering candle in hand, likely ascending stairs at night, his hat in one hand and the flame in the other.
Remarkable, Holmes, but surely all this effort is wasted energy? After all, no crime has been committed, and the goose is the only casualty in this peculiar affair.
Holmes opened his mouth to reply, but was interrupted as the door burst open. Peterson, the commissionaire, stormed in, his face flushed, his expression one of dazed astonishment.
Mr. Holmes. The goose, sir. The goose. Eh? What of it, then? Has it returned to life and fled through the kitchen window?
Holmes twisted round on the sofa, his eyes narrowing as Peterson held out his hand. Resting in the center of his palm was a brilliant blue stone, sparkling like a shard of captured lightning.
See here, sir. See what my wife found in its crop.
Holmes sat upright, letting out a low whistle of amazement as the stone caught the firelight.
By Jove, Peterson, this is treasure trove indeed. Do you realize what you've got? A diamond, sir. A precious stone. It cuts through glass as if it were butter. Not just any diamond. This is the Countess of Morcar's Blue Carbuncle, a gem of such rarity that its value can scarcely be imagined. The reward alone is £1,000, and even that pales beside its true worth.
The Blue Carbuncle. Incredible.
Peterson sank heavily into a chair, his eyes wide as Holmes elaborated on the gem's significance.
It disappeared just 5 days ago from the Cosmopolitan Hotel, stolen in a case that has captured the city's imagination. What we hold here is more than mere treasure, it is the heart of a tale yet to be uncovered. Listen to this, Watson, Hotel Cosmopolitan jewel robbery. John Horner, 26, plumber, was charged with stealing the invaluable gem known as the Blue Carbuncle from the jewel case of the Countess of Morcar on the 22nd of this month. James Ryder, an upper attendant at the hotel, testified that he escorted Horner to the Countess's dressing room to repair a loose grate bar. Ryder remained for a while but was eventually called away. Upon returning, he found Horner missing, the bureau forced open, and the Countess's Morocco casket, which housed her jewel, lying empty upon the dressing table. Ryder raised the alarm immediately, leading to Horner's arrest later that day. Curiously, the stone could not be found on his person nor in his rooms.
Watson leaned forward, intrigued, as Holmes resumed his reading.
To add to the drama, the Countess's maid, Catherine Cusack, confirmed Ryder's account, stating she heard his cry of dismay and rushed into the room to find the scene exactly as described. Inspector Bradstreet testified to Horner's violent resistance during the arrest, his protests of innocence falling on deaf ears. Evidence of a prior conviction for robbery sealed his fate. The magistrate refused to hear the case summarily and referred it to the assizes. Horner, visibly distressed, fainted during the proceedings and had to be carried out of court. So much for the police court.
Watson studied Holmes' face as the detective tapped his chin in contemplation, his mind racing.
The question before us now, Watson, is this: how do we connect the rifled jewel case at one end to the crop of a goose in Tottenham Court Road at the other? Our deductions have taken on a decidedly more important tone. This is no longer an innocent curiosity. The stone came from the goose from Mr. Henry Baker, the gentleman with the deplorable hat and all the characteristics I so eloquently described earlier. We must find this gentleman at once and discover his role in this unfolding mystery.
And how do you propose to do that, Holmes?
The simplest means first, an advertisement in all the evening papers. If that fails, I shall consider other methods.
And what will the advertisement say?
Found at the corner of Good Street, a goose and a black felt hat. Mr. Henry Baker can have the same by applying at 6:30 this evening at 221B Baker Street. Clear and concise, wouldn't you agree?
Perfectly. But what if he doesn't see it?
He will. To a man of modest means, the loss of such possessions is heavy indeed. Fear made him flee when the window shattered, but since then, he must have regretted leaving his belongings behind. The inclusion of his name will catch his eye, or at the very least, others who know him will direct his attention to it. Peterson. Take this to the advertising agency. See that it appears in the Globe, Star, Pall Mall, St. James's, Evening News, Standard, Echo, and any other paper you can think of.
Yes, sir. And what of the stone?
I shall keep it for now. Also, Peterson, pick up another goose on your way back. We'll need one to replace the bird your family has already consumed.
With Peterson gone, Holmes held the gem aloft, turning it to catch the light. It sparkled brilliantly, its facets reflecting a myriad of colors.
It's a bonny thing, Watson. See how it glints and sparkles. A jewel like this is always a nucleus of crime. Every older gem carries a history of bloodshed. This stone is young, less than 20 years old, yet its legacy already includes 2 murders, a vitriol throwing, a suicide, and multiple robberies. Who could imagine so beautiful a trinket would lead so many to ruin? It is crystallized charcoal, yet it exerts such power over men.
And Horner, do you think him guilty?
I cannot say for now. As for Henry Baker, I suspect he knows nothing of the stone's value, or more likely, it was a mere goose to him, nothing more. We shall know more if he answers the advertisement.
And until then...
Until then, Watson, we wait. But join me later, there is a woodcock for dinner, and in light of recent events, perhaps Mrs. Hudson ought to examine its crop first.
As Watson drew closer, the door opened, and Mrs. Hudson directed both gentlemen upstairs to Holmes' familiar sitting room. Inside, the warmth of the hearth greeted them, and Holmes rose from his chair with that easy geniality which masked the sharp intellect lurking beneath.
Mr. Henry Baker, I presume? Pray, take this chair by the fire. It's a bitter night, and I see your circulation favors summer over winter. Ah, Watson, you've arrived just in time. Tell me, Mr. Baker, is this your hat?
The man nodded, his gaze drifting to the hat displayed prominently on a nearby table. He was a large man with rounded shoulders and an intelligent yet weary expression. His face was broad, tapering into a grizzled beard of brown streaked with silver. A faint redness in his nose and cheeks hinted at a certain lifestyle, while the tremor in his hand confirmed Holmes' earlier deductions. His black frock coat was worn and rusty, buttoned tightly to conceal the lack of a shirt or cuffs. Yet his slow, deliberate manner of speech and careful choice of words hinted at a man who had once held a more dignified station.
Yes, sir. That is undoubtedly my hat.
We've retained these items for some days now, expecting to find an advertisement from you in the papers. I admit, Mr. Baker, I am curious why you did not advertise for their return.
Shillings are not as plentiful for me as they once were, Mr. Holmes. Frankly, I assumed those ruffians who attacked me had made off with both my hat and the goose. Spending what little I have on a hopeless effort to recover them seemed impractical.
Quite naturally. Speaking of the bird, we were compelled to eat it.
At this, Baker's eyes widened, and he half rose from his chair, startled.
To eat it?
Indeed. It would have been of no use to anyone had we not. But fear not. The bird upon the sideboard is of equal weight and freshness. I trust it will suffice as a replacement?
Baker's features softened, and a visible sigh of relief escaped him as he settled back into the chair.
Oh, certainly, certainly. That will do very well, indeed.
Of course, We still have the feathers, legs, crop, and other remnants of your original bird, should you wish to keep them.
Baker burst into hearty laughter, the sound echoing warmly in the room.
They might make fine relics of my little adventure, sir, but beyond that, I cannot imagine what use they'd serve. No, thank you. With your permission, I shall content myself with the fine bird on the sideboard.
Holmes exchanged a quick glance with Watson, a slight shrug punctuating the moment as he retrieved the hat and handed it to Baker.
There is your hat, and here is your bird. By the way, Mr. Baker, I am curious, would it bore you to tell me where you procured the original goose? As a fowl enthusiast, I must admit I have rarely seen one so finely grown.
Certainly, sir. There are a few of us who frequent the Alpha Inn, near the museum. During the day, we're often at the museum itself. This year, our good host, Windigate, organized a goose club. For a modest sum paid weekly, each of us received a bird at Christmas. My payments were made in full, and the rest, as you know, is history.
Baker adjusted his Scotch bonnet, his expression lightening as he prepared to leave.
I am much obliged to you, sir. A Scotch bonnet may suit many, but it does little for a man of my years or gravity.
Holmes and Watson watched as their visitor departed, the door closing behind him. The quiet returned, broken only by the crackling fire and the faint hum of the bustling city outside.
So much for Mr. Henry Baker. It is quite evident that he knows nothing about the matter. Are you hungry, Watson?
Not particularly.
Then let us turn our dinner into a supper and follow up this clue while it is still fresh.
With their plans set, the two men donned their ulsters and wrapped cravats snugly about their throats. Stepping out into the crisp night air, the stars gleamed cold and distant against the cloudless sky. The breath of passers-by rose in plumes like wisps of gun smoke, and their footfalls rang out rhythmically on the frost-hardened pavement. Wimpole Street, Harley Street, Wigmore Street, they passed through the quiet doctor's quarter, their pace brisk as they headed toward Oxford Street. Within 15 minutes, Holmes and Watson arrived at Bloomsbury, stopping outside the Alpha Inn. The public house, a modest establishment at the corner of a quiet street, glowed warmly in the winter dark. Holmes pushed open the door to the private bar, the ruddy-faced landlord behind the counter flashing a welcoming smile.
2 glasses of beer, if you please. Your beer should be excellent if it's as good as your geese.
The landlord paused, his expression shifting to mild surprise.
My geese?
Yes. I was speaking to Mr. Henry Baker earlier, a member of your Goose Club.
Ah, yes. I see now. But, sir, they are not our geese.
Indeed? Whose, then?
Well, I got the 2 dozen from a salesman in Covent Garden.
Indeed? Which one?
Breckenridge is the name.
Ah. I don't know him. Here's your health, and prosperity to your house. Good night.
As they stepped back into the frosty night, Holmes buttoned his coat tightly against the chill, his expression marked with determination.
Now for Mr. Breckenridge. Watson, remember that while this may seem to concern only a goose, at the other end of this chain is a man who may face 7 years penal servitude unless we uncover the truth. Our inquiry may confirm his guilt, or it may establish his innocence. Either way, the police have missed this line of investigation, and chance has placed it in our hands. Let us follow it to the end.
Their course took them southward, across Holborn and down in Dell Street, winding through a maze of slums until they reached Covent Garden Market. The stalls glowed under the pale light of gas flares, the name Breckenridge painted prominently above one of the largest stalls. The proprietor, a sharp-faced man with trim side whiskers and a horsey air, was helping a young boy secure the shutters.
Good evening. A cold night.
The man nodded curtly, his glance sharp and questioning.
Sold out of geese, I see.
Let you have 500 tomorrow morning.
That's no good. I was recommended to you. The landlord of the Alpha.
Ah, yes. I sent him a couple dozen.
Fine birds, too. Tell me, where did you get them?
To Watson's surprise, the question provoked a burst of irritation. Breckenridge turned, his stance wide and aggressive.
Now then, mister, what are you driving at? Let's have it straight.
It's simple enough. I'd like to know who sold you the geese supplied to the Alpha.
Well, then, I shan't tell you. So there.
It's of no great importance. I just don't understand why you're so defensive over a trifle.
Defensive? You be as warm as me if you were pestered day and night with questions about geese. Where are the geese? Who did you sell them to? What are they worth? You'd think they were the only geese in the world.
I have no connection to any others who've been asking about them. Let's leave it at that.
As Breckenridge grumbled, Holmes tilted his hat slightly, a sly smile spreading across his face as he prepared a wager.
I wish you were all at the devil together. If any of you come pestering me again with your silly talk, I'll set the dog on you. Bring Mrs. Oakshott here, and I'll answer her. But what have you to do with it? Did I buy the geese off you?
No, but one of them was mine all the same.
No, but one of them was mine all the same.
She told me to ask you.
Well, then, you can ask the King of Prussia for all I care. I've had enough of this nonsense. Now, get out.
With that, Breckenridge rushed forward, his face contorted with frustration, and the smaller man, cowed by the outburst, scurried away into the darkness like a rat fleeing the light.
Ah! This may save us a visit to Brixton Road. Come, Watson, let us see what is to be made of this fellow.
Striding purposefully through the knots of people milling around the market stalls, Holmes deftly overtook the retreating figure. Reaching out, he tapped the little man on the shoulder. The reaction was immediate. The man spun around, his face drained of all color, his eyes wide with fear.
Who are you? What do you want?
You will excuse me, sir, but I couldn't help overhearing the questions you were putting to the salesman just now. I believe I can be of assistance to you.
You? How could you possibly know anything about this?
My name is Sherlock Holmes. It is my business to know what other people do not know.
You can't possibly know anything about this matter.
On the contrary, I know everything. You are tracing geese, specifically those sold by Mrs. Oakshott of Brixton Road to Breckenridge, by him to Windigate of the Alpha, and finally to Mr. Henry Baker's club.
The little man's demeanor changed in an instant. His eyes filled with desperate hope as he stretched out trembling hands toward Holmes.
Oh, sir, you are the very man I've been longing to meet. I cannot explain to you how deeply interested I am in this matter.
Holmes raised his hand and hailed a passing four-wheeler cab. The man's relief was palpable as Holmes motioned him inside.
In that case, let us discuss the matter in comfort rather than out here in the cold. But before we go farther, may I ask the name of the man I have the pleasure of assisting?
The stranger hesitated, his eyes darting nervously.
My name is John Robinson.
No, the real name. It is always awkward doing business with an alias.
A flush rose to the pale cheeks of the man as he lowered his head.
Very well. My real name is James Ryder.
Precisely, head attendant at the Hotel Cosmopolitan. Now, Mr. Ryder, step into the cab. I shall soon tell you everything you wish to know.
Ryder glanced nervously between Holmes and Watson, his expression caught between hope and fear. After a moment's hesitation, he climbed into the cab. The drive back to Baker Street was tense, Ryder's breathing shallow, and his hands clasping and unclasping with nervous energy. The silence stretched, broken only by the rhythmic clatter of the horses' hooves on the cobblestones.
Here we are. The fire looks inviting, does it not? You look cold, Mr. Ryder. Please, take the basket chair. I'll just put on my slippers before we discuss this little matter of yours.
Holmes settled himself, his sharp gaze fixed on Ryder, who sat stiffly, the nervous tension radiating from him.
So, you wish to know what became of those geese?
Yes, sir.
Or rather, one particular goose, a white one, with a black bar across its tail.
Ryder visibly quivered, his face contorting with emotion.
Can you tell me where it went? Please, sir.
It came here. And what a remarkable bird it proved to be. You see, Mr. Ryder, it laid an egg after it was dead, the brightest, bonniest blue egg you could imagine.
Ryder staggered to his feet, clutching the mantelpiece for support. Holmes rose and unlocked his strongbox, withdrawing the brilliant blue carbuncle, which sparkled like a frozen star in the firelight.
The game's up, Ryder.
Ryder's face turned ashen as he collapsed back into the chair, his trembling hands reaching instinctively toward the jewel.
For God's sake, have mercy. Think of my father, of my mother. It would break their hearts. I never went wrong before, never. I swear it on a Bible, sir. I'll never go wrong again. Please, Mr. Holmes, don't take this to court. For Christ's sake, don't.
Get back into your chair. It's all very well to cringe and crawl now, but you thought little of this poor Horner, facing the dock for a crime he knew nothing about.
Get back into your chair. It's all very well to cringe and crawl now, but you thought little of this poor Horner, facing the dock for a crime he knew nothing about.
Humph. We'll talk about that. For now, let's have the truth, every detail. How did the stone come to be inside the goose, and how did the goose find its way to market? Tell us everything, Ryder, for that is your only hope of safety.
Ryder's parched lips quivered as he passed his tongue over them, desperation evident in every movement. He began to speak, his words faltering but steady.
I will tell you, sir. I'll tell you everything, just as it happened.
His gaze dropped to the floor as he recounted his tale, each word heavy with guilt and regret. His gaze dropped to the floor as he recounted his tale, each word heavy with guilt and regret.
After Horner was arrested, I knew I had to act quickly. The police could come searching me or my room at any moment. There was no safe place at the hotel to hide the stone. So I left, pretending I had an errand, and made my way to my sister's house on Brixton Road. She's married to a man named Oakshott, and they keep fowls for market.
Ryder paused, as if the memory of his journey pressed down upon him like a weight. His hands trembled, and his eyes darted toward Holmes, seeking some sliver of absolution.
Every man I passed seemed like a policeman or detective. It was bitterly cold, yet the sweat poured down my face. My sister noticed how pale I was and asked what was wrong. I lied, told her the jewel robbery at the hotel had upset me. Then I went to the backyard to think.
Ryder's voice grew quieter, as if the shame of his actions choked him.
I thought of Maudsley, a man I once knew who'd gone to the bad. He'd just finished time in Pentonville. He used to tell me about thieves and how they got rid of stolen goods. I decided to take the stone to him in Kilburn. He'd know what to do. But how could I get there safely? I was terrified of being searched.
He paused, his hands gripping the arms of the chair as if to steady himself.
That's when I saw the geese waddling about in my sister's yard. And it struck me. She told me weeks before that I could have one for Christmas. I thought, I'll take my goose now. I'll hide the stone inside it. No one would ever find it there.
The firelight flickered across Holmes' face, his expression unreadable as Ryder continued.
I chose a fine white bird with a barred tail and pried its beak open. I pushed the stone as far down its throat as I could into its crop. The bird struggled, flapping wildly, and my sister came out to see what was going on.
I told her I was just feeling the birds to pick the best one. But then, as I turned to speak to her, the bird broke loose and fluttered back among the others.
Ryder's voice wavered, the weight of his mistake sinking in.
My sister told me she'd already set aside a bird for me, a larger one. But I insisted on taking the one I'd handled. She was annoyed but gave in. I took the bird, carried it to Kilburn, and told Maudsley what I'd done. He laughed and helped me kill it and open it up.
Ryder's face contorted with despair, his voice breaking as he relived the moment.
But the stone, it wasn't there. I realized then. I'd made a terrible mistake. There'd been 2 white birds with bobtails, and I'd taken the wrong one.
His hands flew to his face, his voice cracking under the weight of his confession.
I rushed back to my sister's yard, but the other birds were gone, sold to Breckenridge at Covent Garden. I ran to him, begged him, but he wouldn't tell me where they'd gone. You heard him yourselves tonight. He's always answered me that way. My sister thinks I'm going mad. Sometimes I think I am, too. And now, I'm branded a thief, ruined for a jewel I never even touched. God help me.
Ryder collapsed into uncontrollable sobbing, his face buried in his hands. For a moment, there was only the sound of his heaving breaths and the rhythmic tapping of Holmes' fingertips on the edge of the table. Then Holmes rose, his movements deliberate, and threw open the door.
Get out.
Get out. What, so? Oh, heaven bless you.
Ryder stumbled to his feet, his sobs subsiding as he hurried from the room. The sound of his footfalls echoed in the stairwell before fading into the night. Holmes reached for his clay pipe, his expression thoughtful as he turned to Watson.
After all, Watson, I am not employed by the police to make up for their deficiencies. If Horner were truly in danger, it would be a different matter. But this fellow will not appear against him, and the case will collapse. Perhaps I've committed a felony by letting him go, but it's just possible I've saved a soul. He's too frightened to ever stray again.
He struck a match, lighting his pipe with practiced ease.
It is, after all, the season of forgiveness. A most singular and whimsical problem has been solved, and its solution is its own reward. Touch the bell, Watson. Another investigation awaits us, one that also features a bird.
That's it for today, everyone. Please subscribe our channel and stay connected with us.